From a defabricated garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, how to really rev up the excitement at your next colostomy bag reveal party. And now, the podcast host who's got no need for such things because his intestine is as pure as a buffalo, Pete Dominic.
Thank you, Pico. I think. I'm not sure. That was awful. Why would you do that? I mean, a lot of people listen to the podcast while they're eating their breakfast, their porridge, or whatever, their breakfast rice. A lot of people, you know, they start their day with the show and they have to hear those words. Just disgusting. Really, I don't even know. Who played that? I'm going to have to talk to somebody about that. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. Thank you very much for pressing play, for downloading, for streaming, for whatever you're doing that is making this podcast play into your ears. You'll be thankful for it, because today I have Michael Cohen, former Boston Globe columnist, who is one of my favorite commentators on all things, joining me today. We had a great conversation about politics, even baseball, which went on too long, but I liked it because we were talking about steroids. And then also the war in Ukraine and how it's never easy to end a war. Great conversation with Michael Cohen coming up. But first, I've got my old friend Rob Paravonian joining me. He is a comedian and a musician, or a comedy musician, and I've known him most of my career. He's one of the smartest, most talented guys out there, and he's got a new album out, and we had a great conversation, played a few cuts from the album, had a lot of laughs, and a thoughtful conversation. I think you'll really like both of my guests today. But how are you doing, person listening to the podcast? How are you feeling? What's going on with you inside your soul? I hope that you are doing all right. I hope that you're going to hang out with us tomorrow night. If you're not a subscriber, now is the time. Now is the time to sign up. Go to standupwithpete.com right now and sign up and join us and hang out with us on Thursday nights at 8 p.m. and anytime in the Discord platform. By the way, yesterday I had to make an edit on the podcast after it came out. Great conversation with Cody Keenan. If you haven't heard it, listen to President Obama's former chief speechwriter. A lot of great feedback on that. But I had to make an edit on it because there was an issue. And that happens maybe once every 5-10 shows. And you re-upload it or you replace it. And wherever you're listening to the show, Apple, Spotify, or wherever else, sometimes there's a problem and it doesn't download. So if you ever have an issue with the show, before you do anything, check another podcast player. So if you normally listen on Spotify or Apple, you can go to YouTube, or you can go to the host itself, or just go to standupwithpete.com. If you're having trouble listening to the show, go to standupwithpete.com, or you can email me. My customer service box is always open, standupwithpete@gmail.com. If there's an audio issue, a long silence, two things playing at once, any number of issues, please let me know. I can fix it usually, put it right back up as quick as I can. All right, that's all I wanted to say here at the top, other than I love you. I think the world of you. I am so happy that you're out there listening to this podcast. I know there's 7 billion podcasts, so I really appreciate you listening and contributing to the show however you see fit. Thank you very much to Dr. Barry Hummel, Maddie Carlson, Tina Winsett, who have been working really hard to get clips posted every day. If you want to know anything about video editing and want to help us pull and post video clips to help promote the show, let me know. Standupwithpete@gmail.com. Join the Stand Up Street team. We're setting up a Slack. We're really getting going here. Very exciting. Speaking of getting going and exciting, how about the news yesterday? Just a couple of stories here at the top I want to read off to you. Apparently, the deal between Twitter and Elon Musk is back on, which hard to understand exactly what that means, other than Donald Trump will most likely get his Twitter account back, thus allowing him to threaten the Senate minority leader and call people horrible racist names and all kinds of other dangerous rhetoric that he will continue to all day, every day tweet out of his toxic face hole. So we have that to look forward to. Not to mention the rest of the monsters that have been banned from that social media platform for saying horrifically dangerous threats to people. The Twitter deal will continue to develop over the next days and weeks to come, and certainly be talking about that with experts here on the show. One of the experts a lot of people go to on things like this is Kara Swisher. She was on MSNBC yesterday with Hallie Jackson, and here's about a minute and a half from that.
I hesitate to even ask what could Elon Musk be thinking. That's a recipe for disaster. But like strategically, what's behind this?
I have an idea of what he's thinking, but I think he knew he was going to lose, and so he might as well buy it rather than pay a settlement fee that he might have had to do. He was going to pay no matter what, so I guess he probably figured if I can get the financing, other people's money, my own money, I'll just make a go at it. And he knew he couldn't get out of this. I suspect he really didn't want to be deposed. It's a little different than looking at his text, but it could get very dicey for a business figure to be deposed on lots of questions he might not have wanted to answer. And he wasn't going to win. He just wasn't going to win.
All right, well, that story is going to continue to develop over the days and weeks to come. What else do I have for you? Oh, I thought this was pretty interesting. What's going on over at Fox News? Tucker Carlson versus the world. Inter-family fight over at Fox News, where Tucker Carlson is blaming the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline on President Biden and the American government with absolutely no evidence. And then Vladimir Putin and his horrible regime just start playing it on every screen in Russia, including in Kremlin Red Square, apparently. Because what could be better propaganda than the number one most watched person in all of, quote, cable news of America, basically doing Putin's bidding for him? I guess what could be worse would be the actual president of the United States doing his bidding for him, supported by a whole bunch of other Republicans and Americans. But here's Bret Baier trying to clear it up on Fox News yesterday with retired Rear Admiral and National Security Council official of the Biden administration. It's John Kirby.
Did the U.S. or a proxy for the U.S. have anything to do with the explosion on the Nord Stream pipeline?
The United States had nothing to do with it. That's just Russian propaganda and disinformation. Now, we know it was an act of sabotage, but there's an investigation going on right now. I don't think we're going to get into credentialing that in terms of, who was responsible. We're going to let the investigators take a look at that. But clearly, this was an act of sabotage.
All right, here's the Secretary of State. This is why it has churned up all kinds of questions. Take a listen.
It's a tremendous opportunity to once and for all remove the dependence on Russian energy and thus to take away from Vladimir Putin the weaponization of energy as a means of advancing his imperial designs. That's very significant, and that offers tremendous strategic opportunity for the years to come.
Talking about strategic opportunity about this moment, so you can officially say that the U.S. was not involved in any way in this attack.
That's right. That's correct. Now, what we are trying to do is try to limit Mr. Putin's ability to garner revenue through the sale of oil, which is why we pushed so hard with the G7 back in the early summer on trying to get a price cap in place. You saw today, European Union leaders are now that much closer to working out some implementation details on that price cap. We think that will help, while it'll keep Russian oil on the market, because it is a global market, and supply, we want supply to meet demand, but we don't want Putin to be able to profit off it to continue to prosecute this war. So that price cap move, that's another effort in line with what Secretary Blinken was talking about.
Not to belabor this, but for the people who look at this and say, why would Russia attack its own pipeline that creates leverage over Europe and perhaps the West, what do you say to them?
Again, I can't speak to specific accountability for this act of sabotage. I can just assure you the United States had nothing to do with it. Of course, that's just Russian propaganda. And look, again, without crediting it to anybody right now, what I would say is just look at what Russia has done in the past since the last 7 months of this war and when it began, and that is to weaponize energy. He's been absolutely trying to weaponize energy to try to punish customers in Europe, countries in Europe, our allies and partners, to try to coerce them into not being willing to support Ukraine the way they have been. So he's the one weaponizing energy. That's part and parcel of his playbook, Brett.
But John, wouldn't weaponizing energy mean controlling the pipeline?
He does control the pipeline,
but not if he blew it up.
Again, Brett, I'm not attributing this to any one actor right now. I'm saying we have every reason to believe that this was an act of sabotage, but we haven't settled on who's exactly responsible. All I can say is going back over 7 months. Again, let's take the Nord Stream explosion, just take it off the table for a minute. You just look at what the guy has done over the last 7 months. He's holding people hostage and weaponizing energy.
Well, are you satisfied? I'm not satisfied. I don't think he was vehemently denying it enough. But listen, I look for evidence. I want evidence before I would go on my podcast, much less cable news, anywhere other platform, and make such an insinuation, because it's dangerous and it's wrong and it doesn't help anybody. America has been involved in some really sketchy, duplicitous, evil criminal shit over our life and before in generations previous. Obviously, the Gulf of Tonkin incident comes to mind off the top of my head. So I wouldn't be surprised by anything. But until there's evidence of anything, you don't say shit like that and then have it be played by Vladimir Putin, thus making his case for him. Okay, one more piece of sound for you that I want to share. This is U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson yesterday for the first time at the Supreme Court, taking aim at decades worth of conservative arguments against race-based remedies to voting rights laws. The newly sworn-in justice laid out her claims during oral arguments in the case Merrill versus Milligan, challenging Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which 2 judges appointed by Donald Trump previously ruled had been violated by Alabama's legislative map. And Jackson challenged the state's claim that the lower court's interpretation actually resulted in racial discrimination. This is what she sounded like and said. Hard to follow. I mean, this is some highbrow stuff from Judge Jackson, but here she is, and I thought it would be nice to hear some sound from the first black woman on the Supreme Court on her first day of argument, ironically enough, on a case about voting rights.
I don't think we can assume that just because race is taken into account that necessarily creates an equal protection problem, because I understood that we looked at the history and traditions of the Constitution, at what the framers and the founders thought about. And when I drilled down to that level of analysis, it became clear to me that the framers themselves adopted the Equal Protection Clause, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment in a race-conscious way, that they were, in fact, trying to ensure that people who had been discriminated against, the freedmen, during the Reconstruction period, were actually brought equal to everyone else in the society. So I looked at the report that was submitted by the Joint Committee on Reconstruction, which drafted the 14th Amendment. And that report says that the entire point of the amendment was to secure rights of the freed former slaves. The legislator who introduced that amendment said that, quote, unless the Constitution should restrain them, those states will all, I fear, keep up this discrimination and crush to death the hated freedmen. That's not a race-neutral or race-blind idea in terms of the remedy. And even more than that, I don't think that the historical record establishes that the founders believed that race neutrality or race blindness was required, right? They drafted the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which specifically stated that citizens would have the same civil rights as enjoyed by white citizens. That's the point of that act, to make sure that the other citizens, the black citizens, would have the same as the white citizens. So they recognized that there was unequal treatment, that people based on their race were being treated unequally. And importantly, when there was a concern that the Civil Rights Act wouldn't have a constitutional foundation, that's when the 14th Amendment came into play.
And that's what the brilliant Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson sounds like at the Supreme Court, arguing about history and for voting rights in the United States of America. And that will probably be a losing argument, unfortunately. We will soon find out. All right, in other news, Herschel Walker's conservative son slammed his father. You probably know about that, but I just read that apparently Herschel Walker had a record-breaking fundraising day as a result of a Daily Beast report that had actual receipts saying that he paid for an abortion at one point. Only in America. North Korean missile test triggered air raid alerts in Japan. University of Idaho has warned employees against discussing abortion and contraception. I think I'm going to have to dig into that story. Hurricane Ian's death toll has reached 87 as search missions continue. Ian, the protests in Iran have continued into, I think, a 17th day. A group says that 133 people have died so far. And sad news reporting coming out of the Tom Brady-Gisele Bundchen camp, which is that apparently they've both hired divorce lawyers. Man, I hate to end on such terrible news about a very famous marriage, but I guess they couldn't work it out because Tom's married to football, Gisele. All right, well, that's all I've got for you here, and it's probably too much already. 15 minutes in, it's time to get to my interviews with my guests, both of which are excellent. Coming up, the great Michael Cohen, always a fun conversation, interesting conversation. He is a very thoughtful guy, offering a wide range of viewpoints on a wide range of issues, as always. I think you'll love it, including can you ever put a pickle on a sandwich, and who really holds the home run record? Little baseball talk coming up, and much more serious issues as well, of course. But first, I've got a conversation with comedian, musician, or comedy musician, musical comedian. It all depends on what genre you want to put them in. But I've known him for most of my career. He has the mind of a comedian, the soul of a musician, and he really does tap both of them to deliver hilarious, brilliant performances, whether it's one of his well-crafted original songs, comedic observations about music, or a joke-filled song introduction. Rob Paravonian blends comedy and music so seamlessly, people soon stop asking if he's a comedian or a musician and realize he really truly is both. Well, he's got a new album out, and he reached out to me and asked me if he could come on to talk about it and promote it, and of course I said yes, because I've been rooting for this guy for as long as I've known him. The new album is called The Great American Songbook Redacted, American History and Culture Ruined with Songs. I think Garrett Sever and every other musician out there is going to love this, and everybody who cares about politics and current events, culture, is going to love it as well. We had a great conversation. Rob is a great guy. Go buy the album, follow and support him online. RobPRocks.com is his website. Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time on the podcast, Rob Paravonian. And boom, Rob Paravonian is joining me now. Very excited to see you and have you on the podcast for the first time. Great to see you.
Yeah. First time since the XM days, I think.
You joined me at Sirius XM. I mean, kind of whenever you wanted, whenever you're in town, whenever you had something going on. I mean, you were probably on several times. And of course, we've known each other for a long time, and we'll establish, I think, how we met in a second here. But no, first time on the Independent, on the Shedcast.
Yes, very excited to be here.
Yes, much bigger deal than anything I've done in the past. How are you, man? Great to see you. How have you been? How did you weather the pandemic?
Yeah, various ways. I'm generally good, maintaining. Yeah, the pandemic, obviously, as a live performer, it shut down a lot. I had just started doing some cruise gigs as a couple of years before the pandemic, so that definitely stopped. Haven't gone back to them, although some of my friends who are in that industry have gone back. But yeah, during the pandemic, that first year especially, I started a weekly live stream of cover songs. I started doing like some comedy shows live streaming, which was fun for a couple months, and then I just wasn't feeling comedy anymore. But I kept doing this live stream cover song show, and that ended up lasting. The first year I did it weekly. The second year I did it every other week. And by the end of it, I had done like 1,000 cover songs and did like a couple anniversary shows where we did fundraisers and stuff. So that's the one thing that sort of kept me playing music and kept me sane. Or the main thing that kept me sane. Yeah. How about you?
Thank you for asking. I stayed here in my shed. I built the shed. I lost the Sirius gig after almost 14 years in October 19. Started this podcast all on my own, doing all of it basically. I mean, I had a lot of help, people teaching me a lot of things for free. Yeah. And in November, and then when the pandemic hit in 20, I was doing it 3 days a week before then, 3 episodes a week. And then as soon as the pandemic hit, I'm like, well, what am I going to do other than work? My daughters are teenagers. They didn't need much. Yeah. So I went daily, and I've been doing that pretty much ever since. It's a real grind, but I love it. I've been able to make it work so far.
Awesome. Yeah. Very cool.
So congrats on the new album, man.
Thank you.
It is so good and fun. I just listened to it straight through. Just before we talked, and I want to go through some of the tracks, and I think everybody should do what I did, which is just listen to it straight through. But buy it first and foremost, because we want Rob to get money for his art. It's really important that you support artists. Talk to me a little bit. I want to get into the album, The American Songbook Redacted, American History and Culture Ruined with Songs, in a moment. But first, Rob, how did we meet? Doing the college NACA conferences, I believe?
I think either that or in New York, or a little bit of both. We might have done some shows around New York around the same time. But yeah, we were both heavily doing those NACA conferences and shows back in the day. That was Yeah, that was my main living from like the mid 90s through about 2010, was doing shows at colleges. So I know we've crossed paths there a lot.
Yeah, me too. I made a good living for maybe not as many years, but a few years before I washed into other things like audience warm up, which kept me home when I became a dad for sure.
Oh yeah, that's a great gig for.
But I would do for being home and staying in the city and being able to do other stuff. But I would be up for doing colleges right now. I'm not one of those people who's like, I won't perform for college, because no, I would adapt. But yeah, I think the first time I ever saw you perform was at one of those conferences. Like I met you by watching you, and I was like, oh my God, this guy can really play guitar real well, first of all. I just thought you were brilliant. I mean, it's really hard to do music, and it's really hard to do comedy. And I think it's very, very hard to do both at the same time. But you've made a long career at doing it. How would you describe what you do, and how much, if it's changed a lot over the years?
Yeah, I go back and forth, comedy musician, comedian / musician, sometimes singer songwriter is so like singer comedian, but basically I call myself a comedy musician now. And I think over the years, sometimes the comedy is more important and sometimes the music is more important. The last couple of years, I would say it's the music, because I haven't been out performing live as much. So music is something you can do by yourself at home without an audience interaction. So, but yeah,
speak for yourself, sir. You don't walk around just doing your act out loud for nobody.
I do, but it's hard to gauge whether I'm killing or not.
Fair enough.
But yeah, so I've always mixed the comedy and music. Yeah, every once in a while I'll do some music without comedy, but even then, it's kind of, the lyrics kind of tend toward at least silly or funny, So I would say in the vein of like Flight of the Conchords, that kind of stuff.
Who do you like that is in kind of in your lane, that has come before you or now, come up after you?
Well, I like them. I like Flight of the Conchords a lot. And that one of the songwriters from them actually wrote a lot of songs for the Muppets Most Wanted, which is one of my favorite Muppets movies ever. But yeah, that was one of the Flight of the Conchords guys, wrote a lot of songs for that. I like the old school Tom Lehrer stuff. He's from like the 60s, really smart, funny stuff. There's a guy out in LA, Henry Phillips, that I really like a lot. I like some of the people that I've worked with. I do a monthly comedy music show up in Astoria, New York. And there's some really funny songwriters that come up there. There's a funny folk songwriter from New Jersey called, her name is Carla Ulbrich. She's really good. And Bo Burnham, I like him. He's really well known. I think one of the better known people who do this genre right now.
Yeah. I think probably one of the most well known people, but younger than us too. I mean, came up like I tended to hate him at first, because he was highly respected in a very short amount of time, and people like him and John Mulaney, like, they never did anything to me or whoever they were, but like I didn't like how much respect and success they had so quickly. But
yeah, I think they were of the generation that could get really big online before you just met them on the road or anything. Right. So all of a sudden it seemed like out of nowhere everyone's talking about the same three people. But yeah, that, as I think someone who came up in the generation that we did, it was maybe frustrating to see people rocket that quickly. At least that was when I had frustration for that type of thing.
You make a good point about how not only, I think, performers and artists who have straddled this era where it was more traditional live performance, and even record labels that paid you, and before streaming and everything, like the whole trying to make a living part of it has changed, because to make a living in any job, I would argue, you got to get out there, you got to pound the pavement, you got to knock on doors, you got to be seen, you got to be in the right place at the right time. And that was always obviously true of comedians. But to me, it meant go out to the comedy club, move to New York, live there, go out to the comedy club every night. And that's about it. Try to get on stage as much as possible, write jokes, print stuff
hope to get something on Comedy Central or a late night spot.
Yeah, get on TV, print out flyers. But now it's all changed. And I don't like to look at it in terms of like the negativity of it all or being nostalgic, because it just seems worthless to me. And I also hate to try to adapt to it. But we are those of that era that we came up in a more traditional way. And now you can be literally a one-hit wonder with the right TikTok or Instagram or other social media posts. What are your thoughts on how much it's changed and how you adapt to it?
Well, it definitely has changed immensely, and I'm not sure I've adapted to it that well. But yeah, for me, I think a lot of comedians are introverted, and that's something that people who aren't in comedy don't expect. I am very introverted, and the thing I liked about stand-up comedy is that I could do my thing on stage and get all that attention, sort of like hyper-focused attention. And then off stage, I could be anonymous and I could be a fly on the wall and observe society and try to make jokes about it. With social media, it just seems like you're always hyping yourself. And I think, especially for maybe us Gen Xers, or maybe it's an introvert thing, it just feels kind of gross to always constantly being hyping yourself, you know? But that's all social media is, to be an influencer, get followers online and stuff. And I haven't adapted to that well, because I still feel a little bit, you know, I don't know, I cringe every time I send out a press release pitch, or, even emailing you is like, hey, Pete, it's been a while. Could I maybe be a guest on your show? It takes a lot for me to do even that, even though we've been friends, and I know it's not a thing, but I feel that way. So every time I try to post something to promote myself, I feel like I die a little inside. Well,
I understand it totally. I mean, I'm right now, I've started this kind of, promotion of putting out video clips of my interviews.
Yeah.
And it's just a constant promotion. It's like, what I want to do is prepare for the interview and do a good interview. And I'm happy to, do some of it and promote and post it. But what I'd really like to be doing is reading and researching and going through, guest ideas and getting ready for them. And by the way, Rob, I will say, in our editorial meeting, when your pitch came through and your email came through, the team took a hard look, and there was a couple people who passed, and it was mainly my fake producer and my dog.
I have the canine world hasn't quite caught on to me yet.
Well,
I guess
not a fan of some of your work, but to be fair, she's a huge capitalist.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And also, I think a lot of my music isn't in the dog's optimal hearing range, so I need to go a lot higher for them to really appreciate.
I wasn't going to say anything, but she put her paws over her ears when I played the album. I thought that was rude. No, as soon as I got your
put all
email,
those fireworks on the album. That would have really.
My initial reaction when I got your email was, awesome, Rob has something new, and I get to enjoy it. And secondarily, it was, of course, I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to catch up like we're doing, and I'd love to talk about your work and promote it. And everybody should go buy it right now. The American Songbook Redacted. And you can actually get a hard copy CD. You made a CD with the whole traditional graphics and everything. Why do that? And how does anyone make a living as an artist, a recording artist or live performer in 2022?
It's very difficult. I only made 100 CDs this time. I used to make, a run of 500 to sell after shows, because people used to buy them after shows. I did it mostly because I liked putting together the artwork, really. And I think it's this project in particular, I wanted to have some sort of physical media for it, just because I feel like it's something. I don't know. I just feel it's a collective. I feel like it's a whole project. It holds together better than most of the other albums that I've done. Other albums have been, here are the 15 funniest songs I wrote in the last 3 or 4 years. Whereas this project, I feel like it's more of a through line from start to finish, because it's all based on American history and culture. So I guess I just wanted to archive it for myself. And I do like, I still get DVDs from Netflix. I think I'm one of the few people that still actually subscribes to the DVD service with Netflix, because some of the stuff just doesn't stream, and some of the movies that do stream only stream for a limited time. And with the streaming services musically, they can change their terms of service, pretty quickly. Right. And they could, there was that thing recently where they stopped doing stand up. Like they took all the stand up off for a while they had to renegotiate the royalties and stuff. So they can basically change overnight, and they can memory hole entire artists or entire catalogs. And so I do like the idea of actually having some physical media.
Yeah, I think you have to. I think it's worth doing all the work with the graphics and improving whatever. If you're doing that yourself, I mean, or working with anybody all the time. I think it's for all the reasons you just said, to have a hard copy of. I mean, this is an album with 11 great songs, which you put a ton into in terms of writing and performing and recording. And there's several different instruments on it. It's so great. The idea that I wouldn't be able to hold it in my hand. I'm psyched that you made 100 copies. I wish you made more. I think we could sell them right here alone with my audience. Go buy Rob's. Go order the hard copy. It's worth it. This is so much fun. I want to go through a few of the songs. I actually want you to, if we can, I don't know if you think it, I think it'd be interesting to hear you just give a quick explanation of each one of them, because I think they're so good and so different from the last one. Before we get to it, the one more thing that I want to ask you about is just how you arrived at who you are in terms of your views, your morals, how you think about the world and your role in it, because obviously this album it's commentary. It's commentary on American culture throughout the history of this country. You even have a parody of the national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner, called Alternate Anthem, which is really funny. I don't think I've ever heard anybody do that. I really enjoyed it. So, but where, like, the first song is, I think, Remember It Better, talks about where you came from, even, right?
Yeah. I mentioned my hometown right up top, which is one of the reasons I put it first.
Yeah, I like that you did that.
Yeah, I always have this yearning to try to understand what's going on in the last 5-7 years of the poop show that has been, our current country and culture. I enjoy finding through lines in historical events, and it helps me understand where we are today. Like, for example, there's a song about the Satanic Panic, and I remember that when I was a teenager and people being afraid of, heavy metal music and all these stories about, cults that were abducting people, and it got so ridiculous, and then it kind of went away, but it didn't go away, but I thought it did. And then now with the QAnon thing, it's back, and it's very similar. And so that's something I wanted to talk about. I feel like if we remember how ridiculous and illogical the Satanic Panic was, it hopefully could shed light on how crazy QAnon is. But I think the people that know, I mean, a lot of people really know it's crazy, but I think there's something that helps me understand it when I realize it didn't just come out of nowhere. It's something that happens in American culture over and over again. I grew up, my dad was religious. He had an evangelical religious bent. My Armenian grandparents actually founded an evangelical church in my hometown of Waukegan. They were immigrants, and they weren't in the Armenian Orthodox Church. They actually had a very small evangelical church. So I grew up with that. My dad watched a lot of those shows like Pat Robertson and 700 Club and Jimmy Swaggart and stuff. And I grew up with that. And it was very terrifying in the 80s for them to always talk about end of the world stuff. And as I got older and the world didn't end, it was a little bit soothing. But then when I heard about the Great Disappointment of 1844, which was a lot of people in 1844 were convinced that the world was going to end. Yeah. And so many people were so convinced that it was going to end, and it didn't. And they called it the Great Disappointment. And for some reason, for me, it was like a bit of insight. It was like an aha moment. I'm like, oh, it wasn't just us in the 80s growing up being crazy. This is something that we do. Like, this is part of who we are. And I don't know why that makes me feel better, because it shouldn't, but it does. It makes, it makes it feel like there's more to it than just, hey, people are crazy right now. If we know where it comes from, I feel like it's easier to understand how to deal with it. Yeah, no, I think having that perspective is comforting. I understand why. Have you ever heard of the book Fantasyland by Kurt Anderson? How America Went Haywire, a 500-year history, published in 2017. I interviewed him for it. It is like such a kind of a history of these types of ideas being created and curated and affecting culture. And, but for a long, long time, it would seem that it was more of a fringe. Obviously, in some parts of human history, it really took over. And now with social media and the internet being able to spread anything you want, well, that sounds right up my alley, because I've read those, the paranoid style in American politics. And then there was this interesting book I read years ago called The History of the End of the World. And it's just about all the different times people were convinced that this was it. This was the end times. And it goes back to like the 300s, the Renaissance, it's just something that I know, but I feel like this time, Rob, right. No, this time, what was it? And I was worried because the album has like 3 songs that are kind of based on religion or inspired by religious ideas, especially evangelical Protestantism. And I was worried that it was too much, but then was it Lauren Boebert just the other day was talking about how excited it is to be that we get to be the generation that sees the Christ's second coming. And I'm like, it's still happening. Like, it's like still people are convinced.
Is that part of her pitch for her this year's campaign?
She was just, I think it was her. It wasn't MTG, but she was at like some recent speech where like that was the clip that I saw on Twitter where she says, it's exciting. We're gonna witness it.
Lauren Boebert predicts the end times are coming soon.
It's always soon.
It's interesting because you talk about, how that makes you feel as a kid. My reaction right there to that was, I wonder what how her kids feel. And the answer is sitting right in front of me, because you literally just said your dad watching that kind of stuff. And I don't know how much he preached it to you growing up there, just north of Chicago on a Superfund site.
Yeah, Waukegan, Illinois. It's pretty much the halfway point between Chicago and Milwaukee on Lake Michigan. It was a town that was, heavy industry in the first half of the 20th century. And then the industries, slowly went away. But it's what brought, there was a big Armenian community there, lots of different immigrant communities because it was a factory town. But yeah, it's a good place to be from, very working class town. So like outside of, north of Chicago, you get some really nice North Shore suburbs, or bedroom communities, and some, in the county I grew up in, there's also Lake Forest, Illinois, and Highland Park, Illinois, which are very affluent suburbs. But my town is very, working class. Yeah. So I grew up there. My dad, like I said, the end of the world stuff was scary. And plus in the 80s, there was the Soviet Union and the US.
Yeah. That got under my skin a little bit, to say the least.
Yeah. So like, it almost seemed like, of course, they're talking about the world is going to, end by fire, and there's like nuclear weapons pointed at each other country. Like, yeah, it makes sure. Why wouldn't that happen? And then with the devil stuff, the lyrics and the heavy metal music is like, of course, the devil would try to use cool music to trick me out of my soul. That is just so like him. That is just so it
that is so like the devil.
that scamp.
That's a funny bit premise to explore the other things that the devil is responsible from losing your keys to your marriage ending. Oh, that devil.
Yeah. So I guess seeing that it's not just happening right now, it's something that is just ingrained in our culture is almost a relief. It's almost like understanding that, I guess it just takes the panic away from it,
I think my favorite song is Plug Your Ears and Sing.
Oh, the Stephen Foster inspired song.
Who's that?
Oh, so Stephen Foster was a songwriter in the mid 1800s. He wrote Oh, Susanna. He wrote My Old Kentucky Home. So because he was a songwriter in the 1830s and 1840s, he wrote songs for minstrel shows, which were a big part of American entertainment for a long time.
Oh, I'm looking at him. He's a handsome man. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it's a song, and the premise is that these songs that were written for minstrel shows they're a lot about like plantation life. So, and it's, slaves happy about the rural bucolic life, or they're longing for their old master or whatever. And it just reminded me of all the sort of whitewashing of history and the CRT stuff right now, or the laws specifically against teaching, quote, CRT in schools. And it's, the laws that say don't hurt anyone's feelings for their race or whatever. Basically, these are laws that are like sort of enshrining white fragility into law. So it just reminded me that these plantation songs come from the same desire to like minimize the brutality of slavery and Jim Crow South and stuff. So the song is Plug Your Ears and Sing, and it's about just not wanting to learn your history to avoid all the troubling aspects of it. Let's
listen to the first minute of it. I don't normally do these types of interviews because I'm not good at talking about music, and then you get the technical part. But let's see if this works. I do want to hear a few of these songs and share them with listeners from the Great American Songbook, Rob Paravonian. This is Plug Your Ears and Sing. We'll play the first minute of it.
When you're talking history, the stories can be sad. Slaves and segregation can make white folks feel bad. So let's pretend that bondage wasn't as bad as they say. And let's not try to tie the past to what we have today. So don't learn your history, just plug your ears and sing. Ignore unhappy subjects, which is almost everything.
I love that. I love that line. Ignore unhappy. The bigger point I try to make this as much as possible is we don't read things in our history books about how great things were. That wouldn't be an important part of history. Of course, they're going to talk about the development of agriculture or how certain things went well. Of course, they're going to talk about that. But much of history, I mean, you could take it from there, but I just love that line.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Plug Your Ears and Sing was almost the name of the album because I just like that idea so much, you know, and it has this sort of triumphant, willful, ignorant vibe about it, which, but yeah, I think I was listening to your interview the other day with the Obama speechwriter, maybe just yesterday, or is that today's episode?
Cody Keenan, yeah.
So, and he mentioned when Obama was or when they were talking about him giving a speech at the church in South Carolina it was something about him suggesting to take out a reference to something in American history. And Obama's line to him was like, it's sad that you think we can't talk about American history or something, you know, and he was worried about, you know, the right wing reaction to this particular line.
Yeah. You explained it perfectly. Yeah.
But it struck me because that was, you know, that's one of the reasons I did this album is because we do have to talk about it because people are trying to actively erase it, you know, so my girlfriend at the time, when I first did the first version of the show, her mom was not happy with some of the songs. And she was just like, why do we have to dwell on the bad stuff? And I'm like, not really dwelling on it. I just feel like we need to acknowledge it while other people are actively trying to erase it. You know, if they weren't trying to do that, maybe I wouldn't feel the need to do these songs. You know,
it's a weird question as well. Why do we have to dwell on it? Well, dwell is obviously the word that we could quibble with, but why do we have to learn about horrible things that happen to entire populations of people? Genocide, slavery, sex crimes, war crimes, human rights. Like, we have to learn about those things, or we as humans pretty accurately will do them again. Rob, is that not the why we quote dwell on them?
Yeah, or we just won't understand why things are the way they are now if we don't understand how we got here, you know?
At least, an even better point. Well, I love that song. And I think what's interesting, and maybe you can explain, this is what I mean, I can't talk about music, but each song has a really different style. And I think it might have to do with different styles of American music throughout history. How am I doing?
You're doing very well. That's exactly right.
All right. Well, then you mentioned, how about I'll pick another track and you can tell me kind of what influences The Invisible Hand, which is, it's hard to write a funny song, funny joke, or much commentary, even, well, not commentary, it's not hard, but like a music about economics, about capitalism, in this case. But you did it. This is the song is The Invisible Hand. What do you want to say about it? And then I'll hit play.
Well, it's based on the metaphor, Adam Smith's metaphor, the invisible hand of the market, and the way I describe it is like, just let everyone be greedy, and the best of all possible worlds will somehow arise. And so I say the term "the invisible hand" to me sounds like a criminal organization from a James Bond movie. And so I decided to write a James Bond style theme song for The Invisible Hand, because I always love those James Bond like movie themes like Goldfinger and stuff. So I decided, why don't I try to write a James Bond movie theme about the invisible hand? And this is what I came up with. It's so campy. I love it.
Is it you on trumpet?
Sort of.
Have you heard about a power untold? It's there whenever you trade something for gold. Just make money, it takes care of the rest. With no work from you, things work out for the best. It builds a world better than a world could be planned. It's the invisible hand. It's the invisible hand. If they're selling smoke and you can't get enough, and you would kill for just one little puff, then they find out it's the smoke killing you, and they prefer no one had any clue.
It's so
over the top.
It's so good for so many different reasons. But
thank you.
To the content of it. I mean, you picked the tobacco industry. You picked on the tobacco industry, but from tobacco to big, gas and oil, to finance, to pharmaceutical, to building development. A building collapsed in Miami in the United States of America. It's the invisible hand. It's such an important subject to talk about. And if you can write a song that can just maybe interest someone, maybe a young person or anybody else into looking into capitalism, it's great. I think it's great. That song should be played in high schools and watch as the anti-CRT people go, what are you saying? The invisible hand?
That's funny, because when I first was curious about the history of American involvement in Central America in the 80s, it was some pop culture references that sort of piqued my interest.
Sure.
There was a movie called Tapeheads, which is one of my favorite movies. It's very silly. It's Tim Robbins and John Cusack. It's kind of a Repo Man vibe. And at the end, they make a joke about some of the guerrilla wars that are going on in Central America. It's like a throwaway aside, but it's a kind of thing where I remember growing up hearing a little bit about it on the news, but I never fully understood it. And so I went to the library and got some books on that and was kind of surprised and horrified and appalled to realize what we had been doing in Central America in the 80s, but it was a pop culture reference that sort of like set off that little alarm in my head. It's like, oh, there's something there. I wonder if it's something I should know about.
Yeah, it's so good. Every song here does that. And music and comedy and art and culture. I don't say should, Rob. I never say should. I hate when people tell you what comedy or art should be. It can, is all I'm saying. It can. Sometimes it is. Some of your stuff is absurd and ridiculous, but hilarious and entertaining. But a lot of it, obviously, is very meaningful and educational, including Work That Bod, Rob.
That is quite possibly the silliest song on the album, but one I was really happy to work on.
Which is why I picked on it. Tell me, though, what this is about.
Well, it's inspired by the Victorian era cultural trend of muscular Christianity, so in the Victorian era, like, men were worried that they weren't manly enough, which is exactly what's going on today with the masculinity crisis and stuff. So it was another one of those instances where I saw something in America's history where, like, oh, this is exactly the same thing that's happening today. It's 150 years ago. But in the Victorian era, they were worried men weren't manly enough. So, people like Theodore Roosevelt, he took up boxing and wrestling and had to be burly and go out west and get in fights and raise cattle because he had to be a manly man. And so one of the things that grew out of this trend of muscular Christianity is churches started creating athletic facilities in cities where lots of young men were congregating for work in factories and whatnot. And so they created this thing called the Young Men's Christian Association, the YMCA as we know it. And I think it's hilarious that something that grew out of a movement to try to make men more manly became the title of one of the gayest disco anthems ever.
Yeah, here it is. Work That Bod.
This one goes out to all the silly people who keep saying there is a masculinity crisis, because people have been saying that since the 1800s in a movement called muscular Christianity. Back then, men of privilege like Teddy Roosevelt were convinced they had to bulk up and be manly men in order to properly run the world the way God intended. Sound familiar? This world is troubling your soul, caught between traditional and new gender roles. Things are changing, you're not automatically on top. You gotta make the doubting voices stop. So you gotta work that bar. If you wanna get close to God, punching things might just work to make you a self-righteous jerk.
A side goal of mine is to have that song like actually be played in a very disco dance club type of setting.
This world is yours by divine providence, that you deserve to have a place of prominence, but deep down inside you're worried you're not good enough, so you fill your life with what you think is manly stuff, and so you puff out your chest. It's a holy quest to get wrecked and be blessed. If you wanna pass the test, you gotta work that bar.
it's so great. It's so great. If you fill your life with what you think is manly stuff. So puff out your chest. It's a holy quest to get ripped and get blessed. If you want to pass that test, you got to work that bod. It is so.
Yeah, it goes into so much like what is manliness then, quote unquote, and why is it considered a masculine thing for the whatever traits you think are man? Like in the Victorian era, it was also connected to manifest destiny and, white Christian men going out and converting and making the world theirs kind of a thing. So there's misogyny involved. There's so much underpinning that belief that men have to be a certain way and women have to be a different way. And it's a fascinating subject, and it's disturbing that it seems as unenlightened as it was in the 1870s when they were worried about it, that time around, where to the point where Tucker Carlson's putting people like promoting, putting your junk in a tanning booth or whatever the hell that thing was.
Oh, yeah. That weird. What the hell was that all about?
Something
Bizarre.
About red light therapy for your testicles will somehow increase. I couldn't get over the image, so I didn't really want that in my search history, so I didn't.
There's just so much to be said about it. But let me just ask you about like your own journey on that. I mean, we've talked a little bit about race and now, gender and all of it. And I think that I like to consider myself an anti-racist and an anti-sexist. And I think I am a very judgmental and biased. I prejudice. Maybe I'm a bigot about people and things. And I try to recognize that and understand where it's come from and explore that same thing with gender and women especially. I mean, I've always got to check that, whether it's as a commentator, a comedian, or especially as a husband and father, but we develop. And I like to think I've come a long way. I'm still working on it. What's your journey been like? What have been the catalysts or experiments? Were you always kind of surrounded by diversity? Was your a mom a feminist lawyer?
She was not, but she was definitely one who did not put up with the crap that her generation foisted upon her. She was very, very smart, capable, and as I was the youngest of three, I have two older sisters. So for me, I was the one who had to get out of the house enough for my mom to go back to work. And my dad had some traditional values, didn't like the idea of my mom having to work, but she wanted to. And also my dad was a public school teacher growing up. So the money wasn't great. So, any extra money coming in would have helped. So my mom started working part-time and going to night school and stuff. And she ended up, long story short, my parents split up. She moved to Texas with the company she was an admin assistant for, got her degree, and then became an accountant for a large company down in Texas and did, very well. And so hearing her experience about what she went through growing up and in her work experience, for example, when the movie or the TV show Mad Men came out, they deal with a lot of the misogyny of the era in that show. And my mom, when my parents were first married, they lived in New York. My dad was going to grad school in New Jersey, and my mom worked in Manhattan. She would commute in and work. And she would talk about working in the 60s in an office. And she said straight up that if you got pregnant and started to show, you would get fired. Or if you announced that you were pregnant, you would get fired.
Right.
And she tells that to men now, and they're like, that's wrong. She's like, yeah, it's wrong, but that was the way things were. So I feel like you that I've tried to I try to get better every year. I try to be open and learn from other people's experiences. And the thing about you talking about having maybe biased thoughts in your head, I think that's a natural thing that all humans do. We all have biases from our own perspective, and the only thing we can do is try to recognize that and be open to hearing about other experiences and not get so defensive when other people talk about a different experience, which was why that book, White Fragility, was so interesting, because it basically because white people are very defensive when you start talking about race. And I think also, gender issues, they don't want to feel like you're telling me I'm a bad person if I don't think the way you do, but that's not necessarily what it is. It's just someone's telling their experience. You might have a blind spot. I kind of use that analogy a lot. It's like I have blind spots because I just haven't experienced things or I haven't learned about them, So yeah, I try to improve, and I know I'm better than I was. I hope I'm better next year than I am now, so I don't pretend to know everything about everything.
I think I got worse last year. I became more of a bigot last year, but I'm working on it. I'm working on it. That'd be just, I mean, imagine like trying to evolve constantly on an issue like that, but then regressing because of an experience, or some people even, they obviously do change the way they view things given a new book or an experience that they have, often an experience. Usually I like to think that it's to become more evolved, enlightened, or open-minded, but sometimes people move away from what I would consider more evolved or open-minded and into a safer space for them or something.
Oh, yeah. I think I've seen, you see it on your social feeds, you're like people you went to high school with that, all of a sudden became more extreme about various, immigration or race or gender.
Yeah, I always wonder when it's someone I'm like, were they always like that? Or if they weren't, I knew it. I was like, oh, what got them? What radicalized them? Who was it? Which radio show or TV host or I don't know.
Yeah.
Influencer that they follow. Well, your stuff does a great job at enlightening people, opening minds. Let's do one more, Rob, because how the hell did you write? I think this was probably one of the most clever. I mean, most of it is really brilliant stuff, but a song. This is titled Corporations Are People Too, which, of course, probably a lot of people know what that's about. But explain what that's about and what you're trying to say, and then we'll listen to a little of it.
It's about that bizarre concept of corporate personhood, which, I understand there's reasons for it on a practical level to be able to sign contracts and certain things like that. But I think when you start letting corporations have a religious point of view and stuff, or give unlimited money to campaigns, I think it's a little bit ridiculous, and I think it's kind of toxic. So I've been upset about the issue ever since, Citizens United, and I've read a little bit on the subject, and I just always thought I love that sunshine pop of the 70s of, Up With People, or Kids Are People Too, or I'd like to teach the world to sing the Coca-Cola. In my show, I joke about, like, in the 70s, even the Coca-Cola commercials were inspiring. So I just thought it was a very silly way to make fun of the idea of corporate personhood would be to write a very, like, uplifting sunshine pop song about it. So that's what I attempted.
All right, here, folks, the Great American Songbook Redacted, American History and Culture Ruined with songs. Rob Paravonian, Corporations Are People Too, coming at you.
Corporations are people too, they're just like you and me. They have to keep showing quarterly growth thanks to shareholder primacy. They're always trying to look good to sell themselves to the investor class. And they claim that they're really from Ireland to avoid paying U.S. tax.
Admit it, we've all done that. Top of the morning to you.
Corporations are people too, they have needs and desires. They just want to have a few good years so they can be acquired. They can enter into contracts, and yes, they can get sued. But then they go bankrupt and kill themselves, and everyone is through.
Uh-oh. Just try collecting that settlement now. It's going to be tricky.
Rob, it's so good. It's so well written. The quarterly profits being, primacy. Is that how you pronounce it?
I think so. Shareholder primacy.
Yeah, it's the most important point about publicly traded companies is that they have to cut costs. So they're going to cut labor. They're going to cut safety. They're going to cut something so that they can report just even, because the headline's only going to read profits are up, profits are down. So, I mean, and it's such an important line. I try to make that argument all the time as the prime argument. So I just absolutely loved that you have that lyric in your song. Corporations are people too.
You. Yeah. And it's such a short term, or it's a short-sighted philosophy. Like, this quarter, we got to make the numbers. Yeah. What about 4 years from now? It's maddening. So thank you. Yeah. It was a fun one to work on.
Well, Rob, I think this is a really, really fun project. You're always have been hilarious and talented.
Thank you so
great
much.
Guy. And so I'm psyched to talk to you about it. I hope people will go get it. The American Songbook, Rob Paravonian, all the links to all of Rob's stuff, of course, in the show notes. Follow him, support him, and buy. Why should they buy it, Rob? I mean, where does the money go to?
The money goes
Food,
to
shelter,
just survival.
Food and shelter.
Yeah, food, shelter, rent. Maybe another guitar someday.
Okay, if a boy can dream. If people buy the album, what is the worst piece of food they would be contributing to going into your body? What's your weakness?
I've always had a weakness for chips. I don't know why.
Okay.
Like potato and or tortilla. The salty, crunchy always
There's
gets me.
only one bag of chips remaining. It's your last meal. What bag?
Is there a dip involved, or is it just the chip on its own?
I'm gonna make it harder for you. Just the chip.
I have to go with your traditional Dorito. I love them so much.
Yeah,
I know they're bad for me, but
of course they're
delicious.
bad for you. That was never the question of this project. Rob Paravonian, we knew that was the premise. That's what you're contributing to. Go buy
That's
the
exactly
album,
what
Rob.
the question
Thank you. Go buy Rob some Doritos. Thank you very much, man. Well, there you go. Rob Paravonian, everybody. Rob P. Rocks, ROCKS.com. And go get the album, The Great American Songbook Redacted, American History and Culture, Ruined with Songs. Follow Rob and support him on social media and let him know. Please let him know that you heard him here on the show. That means a great deal, obviously. To me and for the show, I try to tell you that every day. Sorry for being repetitive, but it really matters. People see those tweets and know that we're live. That I'll write it. We'll do it live. I love it. My favorite clip of all time. Bill O'Reilly losing his shit. Yeah. All right. Coming up next, my conversation with former Boston Globe columnist, author of American Maelstrom, the 1968 election and the politics of division, as well as the co-author with Mike Kazenko of Clear and Present Safety, The World Has Never Been Better and Why That Matters to Americans. He's written for dozens of news outlets, as well as being a regular columnist for The Guardian. I mentioned the Boston Globe Foreign Policy and the London Observer, the World Politics Review. He used to work as a speechwriter at the State Department, as a matter of fact. How about that? Then on Capitol Hill, also at NBC. He was a senior fellow at New America Foundation and a fellow at the Century Foundation, the American Security Project, and the World Policy Institute. Smart dude. Always loved talking to him. Subscribe to his Substack, truthandcons.substack.com. Follow him on Twitter at SpeechBoy71, where he's always great. We discussed a little bit about baseball. We talked before Aaron Judge broke the home run record, which was yesterday, if you're listening on Wednesday, the 5th of October, 2022. We also talked, of course, about politics, Ukraine, the war, how to end a war, whether you can put a pickle on a sandwich, and so much more. Busted each other's chops, and it's always on the phone with Michael. I call certain people on the phone. I feel like they're better. They're just more comfortable and more relaxed. Bill Boyles, your Eric Siegels. But this, I don't know if this phone quality was good enough. You tell me. If it's annoying, I'll do better. It's no problem to get him to record locally and get a better quality recording. It's just easier for the guests sometimes to call him on the phone as well. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for another visit with the great Michael Cohen, Speech Boy 71, Truth and Consequences. And I always record for people for a few minutes and then find the best place to start the public sharing with you. And Michael and I have been talking for a few minutes, and we were talking about anti-Semitism. We were talking about how that's the one prejudice you're still allowed to get away with and not get canceled. And we discussed that for a while. We're talking about comedians, and we talked a little bit about Mel Gibson. And then that's basically when I hit record. And this is what you hear. First, a whole bunch of noise. I had to scold him here at the top, which I thought was hilarious. Let's do it. You can't think of one example. All right, I'm taping now.
Okay.
But you're making a burrito or you're fixing an engine. It's so loud.
I'm sorry. I'm done.
Are you putting a pickle on a sandwich? Is that what's happening?
Oh, God forbid.
We'll get to that. Please? We'll get to that. But you have to stop. Can you stop making noise for 15 minutes and then I'll let you go?
Okay.
Just answer my questions.
Fair enough.
Can you please just answer my questions? That's what you're here for. Can you
Excuse me.
Excuse me.
Go ahead. Excuse me.
Can you think of, by the way, folks, a quick teaser. Michael Cohen has forced me on a couple of different very divisive issues, including I'm going to defend Ron DeSantis for a moment coming up. Stay tuned.
Wow.
Yeah, stay tuned. Just for 1 second.
Just for a second. Okay.
Can you think of one example of anti-Semitism that has gotten someone kind of fired and prevented them from working again? You can't think of that? I mean...
No, I didn't. I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
I just think that it is the acceptable prejudice. And that for a variety of reasons, anti-Semitism is not the end of someone's career. And, and more often than not, I think people don't get fired for making anti-Semitic comments. They get away. I mean, I love this example because it's always one that surprises people. Do you know who spoke at Aretha Franklin's funeral?
No.
Bill Clinton spoke. Do you know who else spoke at Aretha Franklin's funeral? Louis Farrakhan.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh. And that wasn't a controversy. Bill Clinton, for whatever reason, willingly did that with Farrakhan there. Aretha Franklin certainly didn't get any criticism. I mean, she was dead.
Of course, in case people don't know, Farrakhan has compared Jews to insects, etc., animals, etc.
Yes, he's called Judaism a gutter religion. He's basically a vile anti-Semite. But nobody cared.
Well, well, hold on. It was her wish at her funeral.
Okay, so if Bill Clinton dies and one of the speakers is who's a vile racist? I don't know. I can't think of it off the top of my. I mean, maybe the most vile racist you can imagine, a white supremacist. People would be critical of that.
You're saying, okay, I see what you're saying. You don't think people were critical enough of the fact that Louis Farrakhan spoke?
No, I mean, that's at this point, like, I'm not. It wasn't. At the time, I remember I was seeing that, I was being stunned by it. A lot of people spoke. It was like 5 people spoke, but one of them was Clinton, and one of them was Farrakhan, and she was friends with Farrakhan. But the point I'm getting, and because you raised Mel Gibson before we started recording, Mel Gibson, I mean, has made a host of just incredibly vile anti-Semitic comments, and yet doesn't stop him from making movies in Hollywood. Doesn't stop him at all. And so,
I think it has stopped him. I think it stopped him for several years, and I think the kind of roles and certainly the payday is got to be lower. I mean, is that wrong?
I have no idea. I just know that if he had made racist comments, he would be done professionally. He would not get a movie deal. I would not be starring in a movie. Wouldn't happen.
Now, where are you on Armie Hammer?
I don't know enough about that case.
I don't either. But
I don't really care.
But I want to. I really want. Okay, so getting back to seriousness. No, I think I see what you're saying. And I agree with you. I was just trying to push back. I mean, I pretty much fully agree with you on this issue.
I mean, look,
anti-Semitism.
I make up the point that Rashida Tlaib has, who is a congresswoman from Minnesota, has said a number of pretty blatant anti-Semitic remarks. That have relied on traditional anti-Semitic tropes about Jews and money, about Jews and political power and what have you. Not only is she not canceled, but she's actually celebrated. Why? Because she's been the victim of anti-Muslim attacks. So there's like a categorization, there's a hierarchy, I should say, of this prejudice, which is acceptable, unacceptable. Anti-Islamic, Islamophobia, highly unacceptable. Anti-Semitism, let that one go.
I made a anti-Semitic comment privately during our subscriber hangout last week. I'd like to make it publicly to a Jew. That would be you.
Okay, please go right ahead.
Somebody was talking about Rosh Hashanah and what is it? Is it Kugel or Krugel?
Kugel.
The dish.
Kugel. Yes, the dish.
And I did like a Jackie Mason voice, and I said, "We love Kugel because we're frugal." And people there were like, "Whoa, hey!" And I was like, "I don't know." Like, I came up in the time, I sold Jackie Mason's albums at his Broadway show. Wait,
are you saying some of your best friends are Jews?
No, every Jewish comedian I know makes jokes about like those cheap, or they used to, and I don't think people make them as much anymore, but it was like Krugel, it was rhyming frugal with Kugel, Jewish, and I did it. And I'd like to apologize.
But you know how that works though, right? Jews can make those jokes just like a black comedian can make certain comments that a white comedian could not make.
I think comedians can make certain jokes. I feel like I'm honorary some things, and I feel like regarding what the joke is, I mean, would I? Probably not at this point. But I mean, I used to go into all black rooms and do material about black people, and it wasn't though punching down generally.
Well, I guess the thing is, with comedy, I sort of don't really care.
Right.
Like, I can't imagine a comedian making a joke that would truly offend me.
Right. But Rashida Tlaib saying that Jews are cheap or something about money grubbing or something like that.
I shouldn't have said Tlaib. There's been other anti-Semitic comments. I actually meant Ilhan Omar. Excuse me. Forgive me. I meant Ilhan Omar. She made a series of anti-Semitic comments. Rashida Tlaib has said things that I think are anti-Semitic as well. And I actually don't even know if they understand why they're anti-Semitic. In the case of Ilhan Omar, I think she just sort of there is kind of like this, understood sort of anti-Semitic tropes and beliefs people have, and they may voice them and not realize they're even anti-Semitic. But she's a politician, right? I mean, a comedian and politician. I'm not going to make this.
So are you not am I forgiven for my Kugel Frugal?
You're forgiven because I've heard you make incredibly offensive comments about, my God, blacks and gays and Hispanics and women. Yes. I mean, I've heard you make some of the most awful
but all
comments
off
I've ever
air
heard.
Privately to you.
I'm joking, of course. No, I just said I give comedians about a pretty broad, ability to make offenses.
I try to keep my bigotry private and the safety of my own home.
Oh, but that joke you told about the black gay guy in the wheelchair, oh my God, that was just
that, to be fair, that was mostly not about race and gender and only punching down at folks that are in wheelchairs. Like, I barely mentioned. I did say, I'm trying to do the joke that never happened. I did say that, well, let's get to something less divisive yet still divisive, and it's about sports, and I rarely talk about sports, but I think this is interesting, and I think that you're wrong, but I also think you're about to hand me my ass. The home run record is something you don't have to be a sports fan to think a little bit about. Maybe you don't care at all, folks, but it has to do with steroids, and so the record was held for a very long time, over 50 years, by Roger Maris, who hit 61 home
40 something years. Yeah, 40 years I think it was.
And then in whatever year McGuire and Sosa broke it.
Oh yeah, that was earlier. McGuire and Sosa broke it earlier. It's like 35.
And then Barry Bonds broke it over and over and over. But there was this era in baseball where a lot of heavy hitters and pitchers got caught using performance enhancing drugs. And you could tell by just looking at them because they look like they'd been stung by several bees' nests. And McGuire, Sosa, Bonds, they just look swollen. Nonetheless, there's a question and controversy over now because there's a New York Yankees player named Aaron Judge, who just surpassed 61 home runs, whatever he's got.
Nope. Tied it. He hasn't. There's a few more games he might. But your point on Twitter is in support of performance enhancing drugs. Yes? Yeah. That's not my point, Pete.
Oh. Forgive me. I misunderstood, and that's why I'm happy to have you here to explain yourself.
My point is that Barry Bonds, who 73 home runs in 2001, I believe it was, he is the home run record holder. And there has been this argument for a few people have made in the last couple of weeks, that, including Roger Maris Jr., that those records don't count because Barry Bonds was allegedly using steroids. Allegedly, I make this point all the time. Barry Bonds never tested positive for steroids. There's no conclusive evidence he did use steroids. I didn't know anything about this.
My eyeballs would tell you otherwise.
Your eyeballs don't count.
My before and after picture of him within like just a couple of years, he's like a skinny, muscular guy.
But here's the thing. None of that stuff. I mean, it was crazy. There's no testing regimen at the time. And, I make this point about like McGuire sometimes. Like Mark McGuire, took this steroid called Andro. Not only was he not hiding it, you could actually see it in his locker room when he was basically trying to break
his arms.
There. You could, but it wasn't like it was some big secret that he was doing this. It was, it was right out there in the open. And so, but that notwithstanding, even if you think Barry Bonds used steroids, should Babe Ruth's 60 home run that he hit, I think 2029, I forget what year it was, that Maris broke, should that not count because he didn't actually have to face black or Hispanic players because there was a color barrier that in place until the 1940s? I don't think so. Should Roger Maris's streak, 61 homers, not count because he did it in a season where there were more games than when Ruth played? There was 8 additional games in 62 when he broke the record. In fact, for years there was like a mythical asterisk around his record.
Yeah. I guess it matters.
He played in more games than Ruth. So the argument was that he really didn't break the record.
Okay.
And I just find this to be, you can't square the circle on this.
I don't want to spend too much more time on it other than to ask you, is your opinion that of baseball writers and respected, analysts ethical analysts? I mean, is it, I thought this was pretty widely held. What I believe.
It's held among baseball writers, unfortunately, who I think hold on to this sort of puritanical notion that anybody ever cheated in baseball should, be vilified. The reality is people have cheated in baseball since baseball was invented. I mean, Gaylord Perry's in the Hall of Fame, won, I think, 324 games. He wrote a book while he was a player bragging about how he used a spitball. That's cheating. I don't see anyone saying he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame.
I never don't laugh at that name, Gaylord. When I collect baseball cards when we were little, it was just like, he was like proud of it. He had no problem with it, obviously. Right there on the baseball card, Gaylord.
There is good evidence that David Ortiz tested positive for steroids. There is some evidence of that. And nobody said we shouldn't have him in the Hall of Fame. People love Poppy.
He's more likable. He's more likable than Bonds and McGuire.
I mean, Barry Bonds is a deeply unlikable person.
I don't know.
Oh my, no, he is. I mean, he's a jerk.
Yeah,
Everyone says he's a jerk.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a jerk.
Okay.
But Roger Clemens is a jerk too. I hate Roger Clemens.
He's a real son of a bitch.
Him.
Yeah.
But he's one of the 5 best pitchers in baseball history. He should be in the Hall of Fame also. Both of them should be in the Hall of Fame.
Is it true that you're also carry on this defense and you are good friends with Lance Armstrong?
So the other thing I'll say about Lance Armstrong is a different case in my view, because first of all, there were rules. There was a testing regimen in place that Armstrong worked his way around. There wasn't, again, no testing regimen when Bonds broke the record in 2001. And there's also, by the way, and people hate this argument, but it's true. There's no real evidence that steroids makes you hit more home runs. There's a Mitchell report that came out, I forget what year it was, basically detailed people who tested positive for steroids at one point, and half of them didn't see an increase in home runs. There's no evidence that actually makes you hit more home runs. Wow. I think the best evidence for steroids is it keeps you healthier, and it keeps you on the field, which is one of the reasons why Bonds, he was hurt in 2000, and after he started allegedly using PEDs, he remained healthy. That's the best argument, I think, for why he was using it.
But now it sounds like you're saying take steroids, kids, because they keep you healthy. But I think what you mean is they help you. That is what I'm saying.
I
think what you mean is, no, but I think it means that steroids can help you recover from injury and maybe even not be injured. I don't know. I mean, but they're long-term effects on, you don't want to take steroids, performance enhancers, those kinds of steroids for those reasons. You shouldn't, right?
No, you should not be using steroids. I mean, I'm not a medical expert, but my understanding is you should not be using them. Yeah. But my point here is that, there's not a lot of evidence that steroids actually help these guys hit more home runs. I mean, Mark McGuire hit like 50 home runs his rookie season. He was when he was a beanpole. He was a good home run hitter. There's no question that using roids had them build up mass, helped them become stronger. That guy could hit home runs, in his sleep. And the thing with McGuire, by the way, the reason why he was not as good a player early in his career is because he kept getting hurt. Again, that's one reason why a lot of people, started using steroids. But again, the pitchers were using steroids. Should there be a dispensation for, if Bonds not been using it? Was it fair for him to face off against pitchers who were using it? I mean, there's just so many ways you can try to debate this. And my view of it is just stop debating it, right? There's been cheating in baseball for as long as we've had baseball. Players are competitive. They'll always seek an advantage, always, because that's what competitive athletes do. And we should just stop with this sort of bizarre puritanism about the steroid era. Because, I'll just give one more example. Last year, Sports Illustrated had a big article saying that 90% of the pitchers were using this thing called sticky stuff, which was this goo that pitchers would use to help them basically manipulate the ball and create a lot more torque on the ball. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, Garrett Cole, pitcher for Yankees, basically admitted that he was using sticky stuff. I've heard nobody say that every pitcher pitched in 2010s or 20s should not be in the Hall of Fame because they're using sticky stuff. But that's the argument people do about steroids. It's a stupid, ridiculous sort of argument just about that issue and not about the larger phenomenon of cheating in baseball that has gone on. Again, there's stories that Babe Ruth used to inject bull semen into his body. There's Mantle and Maris, when they were trying to break the home run record in 1961, were taking amphetamines pretty regularly. They were available in most clubhouses in baseball. So this stuff has been part of the game forever. And drawing the line on just the steroid era just seems arbitrary and frankly kind of ridiculous.
Whatever will get you to stop saying sticky stuff. I don't like those two words at all.
It's not a word you like to say very often. It's true.
Ron DeSantis, basically, you what did you tweet about the governor of Florida, who has been dealing with obviously this horrible hurricane down there?
Yeah, he had a contentious interview with a reporter from CNN, and I said that that one of the important skills of being a politician is keeping your inner prick in place. I don't mean your actual prick. I mean your inner prick, your inner jerk, your inner, a-hole. And he does not do that very well. He's not very good at keeping that in check. And I think it's a problem for him. I think he comes across as a jerk, as a prick, if you prefer, and that people pick up on that. That's one of the reasons why I think his political, there's a ceiling on his political future.
Yeah, I think you're right about that overall. I'm just going to cherry pick. It was just interesting because the clip you shared, I probably watched the same clip because you shared it from Mediaite. And in that, the headline of it was DeSantis snaps back a CNN reporter's question about evacuation orders. And he does. He absolutely does. It's not an inaccurate headline. But the whole interview is 8 minutes. And I watched the whole thing. And it seems like he realized that she was asking fair questions that anybody else would be asking. And he decided to dial back the dickishness. And I thought that was interesting. And I wondered if he would be able to figure out how to do that on a larger level, because I have heard from Republicans who know him, apparently, that he is not a charismatic guy, not a very likable guy in general. And that'll be a problem for him if he does decide to run for president. See, overall, I think you're right. But in that clip, he seemed to dial it back.
Yeah, he did. I agree with you. He did seem to dial it back a little bit. But I think that the fact is it was an 8-minute interview, but what got the headline was him snapping at this reporter because, that was the sort of news element of it. And I just think, reporters ask questions you don't like all the time. I mean, if you're a politician, there's no situation in which you don't get asked. It happens constantly. You have to sort of accept it and not snap at a reporter if asking an annoying question or a question you don't like, a question you don't want to answer. And, you've seen this before with him. I mean, he just has this abrasive element to his personality. There are not many politicians, and you could argue Trump is an abrasive personality, and he is, but there is something, I don't quite get it, but there is something sort of charming about Trump. There is something charismatic about Trump, even though I don't personally understand it, but I can see how other people get that from him. You don't get that kind of charisma or from Ron DeSantis. You get this sort of nasally voice, this kind of abrasive personality, this kind of constantly sticking it to his political opponents. I mean, there's no sort of self-deprecation. There's no humor. He's just kind of a unlikable figure.
Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of Ted Cruz, although Ted Cruz is more unctuous than DeSantis, less openly dickish. But I remember seeing actually Cruz at a campaign event in, I think it was New Hampshire, must have been, or Iowa. New Hampshire, 2016, and just struck by how phony he was.
Yeah.
And how, unctuous is the word that I always think of when I think of him. And when I love that word, by the way. I think it's a good word. But but in general, the thing with Cruz was that kind of thing. Okay, Republican voters might be able to see through it, although they didn't in 2016. I think a lot of voters see somebody like that and they just don't like that person. They find that person off-putting, and people need to like politicians. They need to like them on a personal level to vote for them. I mean, Joe Biden, people like Joe Biden. Even if you don't vote for him, people generally like Joe Biden. He's a likable guy. He's a nice guy. He says, malarkey and things like that.
Not if you believe that he's a groomer and a pedophile.
I mean, yes, of course.
And I wonder, by the way, and that leads me to this, my next question for you, which is just about where we're kind of at in America right now. And obviously it's different in different districts and states. But what I am seeing happening, and I don't have the data for this, but I'm seeing it a lot, is these kind of MAGA extremist Republicans, many of them throughout the country running for House seats and other offices, are not doing interviews, Michael, with local media. And I mean your localist of local media, because even they will ask the right questions, and not necessarily tough questions, but they'll ask you where you are on things. And seeing as that Republicans don't really have a platform, but more importantly, they just want to avoid, what I'm seeing is a lot of Republicans, they are running just based on ads. They're doing no interviews. There's not much local media. What local media there is, they are avoiding it. And I think that's interesting because they might not have to do much if they just have people on Facebook and they're doing their ads. It's something I'm noticing. I'm not sure how pervasive it is, but the idea that they're avoiding even local media interviews and questions just to not have to be on the record, plus they don't have actual ideas and solutions. What do you think about that?
Well, the best example of this is Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania, running for governor, basically has refused to talk to anybody who's not a member of a conservative media outlet. Yeah. And look, I mean, first of all, on a basic level, it's incredibly disrespectful to the electorate. I mean, and frankly, to journalism. I mean, even if you hate the press, which most politicians do, right? We do have a free press in this country. It's first protected by the First Amendment. It's important to have a free press. I think every politician would at least, you would hope, acknowledge an adversarial press corps is an important part of an effective democracy. And what basically Mastriano was saying is, I don't care about that, because I don't trust them and I don't like them. It's undercutting a very basic element of our democracy. But, and by the way, also undercutting in the sense he's not even talking to half the electorate. It's also just incredibly stupid. I mean, you're not going to get elected if you don't talk to voters. And the reality is that all Mastriano is doing is talking to people who already support him. You need to want people who don't support you. And if you don't talk to them, guess what's going to happen? Your opponent is going to define you. That's what's happening in Pennsylvania. Now, granted, Mastriano has no money, so he's getting outspent. But basically, if you want to hear what Doug Mastriano says, you're not going to see many ads because he doesn't have money to run ads with. You're going to see what Josh Shapiro, going against him, Democrat, says about him. And those things are not positive. So from a political perspective, he's not helping himself by doing this. In fact, he's actually destroying himself pretty royally.
I feel like you said you had to go, but I had two more questions for you.
No. I can go. I can talk.
Okay, so my next question is your take on what is happening with the war in Ukraine. You've got some really interesting tweets, and I'm not sure if you've written a new article at Truth and Cons.
I just have a piece coming out any minute now. I just wrote it today. I have two pieces I've been working on, and I just it's funny how this happens. I wrote a piece last night, so I was late working on it, and this morning I woke up and I thought, I want to go in a different direction. So I have one today and one tomorrow I'm going to do. But the one today is making kind of an argument that, a point that I sort of made before, but I think needs to be kind of reminded, people need to be reminded of, that our interests and Ukraine's interests are not the same, right? Ukraine wants to win this war. They want to humiliate Russia. They want to get all their territory back. And they're willing to go pretty far in order to accomplish that goal. The U.S. does not generally shares that goal, but, in certain respects, a deal that got Ukraine 80% of their land back, but ended the war and stopped the escalatory threats from Putin about using nuclear weapons, that would be fine. We'd be okay with that, even if Ukraine would not. And I just made this point that I think it's important to remember that our interests kind of diverge. And the example I sort of used to generalize the point was that back in the 1990s, during the wars in the Balkans, the Bosnian Muslims, the Bosnian and the Croats were basically on a military offensive. They were nominally our allies. We were supporting them. But we pressured them to halt their offensive because we thought doing so would make it easier to get a peace deal, which actually turned out to be largely correct. So, and that was a situation in which our interests diverged from theirs. And there are other examples. I pointed to Israel is often an example. We have put pressure on Israel to, even though they're maybe not a close ally in the world, we put pressure on them to end certain military offensives or so forth because, we think it's going to be bad for us, going to boomerang against us. And so I think what's happening in Ukraine, I think people have to realize we're not at that point yet, but we may get to that point soon, in which our interests are going to diverge pretty strongly with Ukraine's interests. And when that happens, it's going to be a lot of work by American officials in order to, balance our interests and also the interests of the Ukrainians. Because we don't really want the Russians to be humiliated and embarrassed and unstable. We would prefer an outcome in which Russia is weakened, but at least comes out of this somehow, I guess, able to, I don't want to claim victory, but at least in some way where they're not continuing to be a pain in the ass for the region. And I don't know that Ukraine doesn't have the same agenda. In other words, like we want the war to end because we want there to be stability. We want to end the threat of a nuclear exchange. We want gas prices to go down. Ukraine doesn't care about those things, and unreasonably so.
What do you think about the Putin's rhetoric, saber rattling about nuclear war and the reactions to it?
So here's the problem with my argument. I'm going to critique my own argument here, is that Putin just, whenever he sees an exit ramp to this war, he just slams on the accelerator, right? He just doesn't seem to want to get out of this war. He just seems to want to keep doubling down on a failed policy. And, when a couple of weeks or two ago, when this thing happened with the nuclear threat and the mobilization, we mobilized 300,000 Russians, I thought, well, maybe this is an indication from Putin that he wants a way out of this conflict, that he's signaling to the Americans, look, things are going to escalate. You don't want that. I'm going to bring in more troops, which means the war is going to go on longer. You don't want that. So maybe it's time for you guys to step in and try to find some kind of diplomatic compromise. Well, that didn't really happen. And in fact, what ended up happening was that Putin did something incredibly stupid and annexing 4 territories in Ukraine. And by doing so, it not only led to more sanctions from the U.S., but I think really just, further isolated himself.
Also, the
really
instituted the draft
difficult.
where like hundreds of thousands of people have left the country as a result, right? That's
right. There's that too. But to me, that was like, again, I think you could have read that as an indication of like, I'm willing to see this war go on much longer. And if you're the U.S., you're like, we don't really want that. We want this war to end because keeping this alliance together of Europeans and America supporting Ukraine, at some point it's going to become more difficult, especially like this winter when oil prices continue to rise because Russia is not sending oil to and gas to the Europeans. That's going to become a problem for the Europeans, a domestic problem for them, and it's a problem for the global economy. So we don't want any of those things. We're a hegemon. We like stability. Stability is good for us. We don't care about the stability. We just want the world to be peaceful and stable so we can trade with them. And so, we don't have to worry about getting involved in stupid wars. But the thing is, the longer this goes on, that's harder to achieve. So our goal here is really, I think, a little different than Ukraine. So again, we share a lot of the similar goals. We want to get Russia out of Ukraine. We want to stand up democracy in Ukraine. We want to, embarrass the Russians, or at least we want to weaken them, I should say. But at the end of the day, we kind of want this thing to be resolved sooner rather than later. I don't know that Ukraine feels the same way. And if Ukraine decides we want to go into Crimea and take back that territory, is that going to lead the Russians to escalate the conflict further? Maybe. Do we want to risk that? I don't think we do. So there's a bit of a tension here. I'm not basically, don't call me an appeaser, and don't say that I'm just saying we should give in to the Russians. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that at some point, this is going to become these diverging interests are going to come in conflict with each other. And we should be prepared for that situation to occur, because it will.
Michael Chamberlain Cohen, everybody.
That's it. I prefer Neville, but you can do Chamberlain.
Neville is a fun. Well, there's a tweet that you wrote about kind of, here it is. Who's William Ruger? You shared this. Former VP of, I don't know. He's a American. Anyway, he writes, sage foreign policy is often about dealing with a lot of non-ideal choices and picking the least bad. President worries that Ukraine victory beyond a certain point could imperil gains and risk high costs. This is not stupid. Remember that the nuclear enemy gets a vote and also faces constraints. And you point to, as you did earlier in our conversation, analogies regarding when that happens. But I thought that was an interesting, really important, nuanced point about it's often about.
I basically agree with Will about this. I mean, I think he and I have a slightly different view of how much we should support the Ukrainians. I think I probably am more supportive than he is. But I think his basic argument is correct. I think one of the problems with foreign policy debate is that we think that there is a good and bad solution to foreign policy challenges, and there almost always is not. Usually, you're choosing the least worst option.
Right.
I'm working on a big project in Afghanistan right now, and there wasn't really a choice between, well, there actually ended up being one, between the U.S. Winning and the Taliban winning. I mean, that ended up happening because we didn't choose least worst options. And there were some least worst options we could have chosen in Afghanistan. The thing is that we have to recognize that it's very hard to control events overseas. It's very hard to control what countries do. They have other interests than our own. And we also have to think about, what's the solution that we can live with? What's the solution that everybody can live with and walk away from the war happily? And in a sense, that's what good diplomats have to figure out. I use this example, by the way, if I don't mind, you have a second here. The Yom Kippur War, I use this example. The Yom Kippur War, that the Egyptians invaded into the Israel-controlled Sinai Peninsula. The Egyptians attacked. They did a beachhead into Sinai. They really bloodied the Israeli army. Mm-hmm. And Israel responded by crossing the Suez Canal and encircling the Egyptian army. And they basically had an open road to Cairo. And Henry Kissinger, as Secretary of State at the time, basically said, you need to stop. Because, you can humiliate the Egyptians, you can defeat them, you can destroy their army. But if you do that, this is going to make it more difficult to find a way to end the conflict between Israel and its neighbors. And arguably, you got a ceasefire. Arguably, that laid the groundwork for the Camp David Accords a couple years later.
It's I've heard this a lot. This kind of idea throughout history, and it's a hard thing to prove what the outcome will be. But I think I've read a lot of historians talking about giving credit to George H.W. Bush for when the Soviet Union collapsing, kind of not making it worse for them, both in his rhetoric and in policy. And that's a hard thing to prove how it would have been different, right? But the point is, he didn't, and for good reasons. It's also interesting to think about the current Iranian revolution. During the Obama administration, the advice there was don't take sides because you will make it worse for the revolutionaries. They will, get behind.
That's true. Yes.
I mean, so these things are complicated. And everybody just wants to kick ass and end it, and that's why we keep losing not only our wars but our battles.
But I think it's also a question of like I think we're trained to think of like World War II and Japan and Germany
and movies.
But in those cases, we demanded unconditional surrender. We refused to negotiate, and maybe that was the right position. I mean, I think arguably it was the right position.
Yeah, but they were also conventional wars, and they weren't insurgencies. Like for the most part,
they weren't. But that I'm not sure that even matters, because at the end of the day, you want to think about how do you end a war that's short of one side being destroyed, in which everyone can walk away happily. In the case I use the Yom Kippur War, look, the Israelis could walk away and say, look, we ended up having this huge military victory. The Egyptians can say we bloodied the Israelis, we won back some of our honor, and this was actually how they viewed it. And the Americans can say, this was a good side. This was both sides can claim victory. Yeah. And then we can lay the groundwork for a potential peace deal, which will end up happening. And I think that's how to think of it. It's very hard. I almost feel uncomfortable saying this, that we have to think about how do we give Russia a way to walk away from this, able to claim victory. I don't really want that because they don't deserve it. But I also want the war to end. I don't want there to be a nuclear weapons being used in Ukraine. And if that means having to give Russia some semblance of victory, even though it's clearly not, fine. I'm okay with that as long as it prevents a worse conflict from emerging. At the end of the day, Ukraine is not going to defeat Russia. Russia's still going to be there after this war is over, right? Ukraine's not going to conquer Moscow. That's not going to happen. Russia's still going to be there. And what they look like after the war actually does matter. It matters for Ukraine. It matters for the U.S. It matters for the world. And I just think that's the kind of consideration that American diplomats have to have, that Ukraine maybe doesn't have to have in the same way. And so all I'm saying is that we need to put ourselves, it's always important to put yourself in the shoes of your adversary and think, what do they need to walk away from this war, walk away from this conflict and claim victory? Because often that is the way that you end a conflict.
How do you end a conflict is a really fascinating subject to explore about, conflicts throughout human history. It's important, and I appreciate it. I feel so dumb sometimes in talking about this because I feel often on this conflict outside of the most absurd opinions, that the last smart person I talked to about it, I agree with. That's me. That's me.
Okay, I'll take it.
I think you made a lot of good points. So finally, you think this, I'll let you go, but you think no pickles ever on any sandwich ever. You said that on Twitter and it was really divisive.
Listen, I have a lot of different views, and I respect that people have different viewpoints and may disagree with me. Mm-hmm. On this point, I am correct, and my critics are wrong.
With the caveat that hamburgers and hot dogs are not sandwiches.
They're not sandwiches, obviously. Okay. Anyone says that is a moron, obviously. But a hamburger, you should not put pickles on a hamburger, in my opinion. No, I shouldn't say my opinion. You know what? I take it back. On the Bonds 73 home run thing, that I'm correct, and everyone else is just wrong. On the pickles thing, I get that people have different perspectives. Some people like pickles, some people whatever. I mean, some people, like terrible things. That's fine. That's their right. But on this, I feel very strongly that in my case, don't put a pickle on my sandwich, because if you do, those are fighting words where I come from.
I guess. I mean, it seems pretty absurd to me, but I just would make the point only that the reason why I argue that hot dogs and hamburgers are sandwiches are so that I can, when my wife asks me where I went or what I got to eat, I can say, I just got a sandwich, because that sounds healthier than, I ate a meat burger of some sort.
So you're using hamburgers as a sandwich in order to lie to your wife. That's fine. I can live with that.
Yeah,
sure.
I guess if you want to call it a lie. I mean, I call it a sandwich.
But you don't actually believe that a hamburger is a sandwich.
I think I don't understand even this history, this age-old argument. I mean, if it's anything between two pieces of bread, it seems to be a sandwich. Anything.
I guess. I don't know.
I didn't know
really
why
agree.
that's controversial. I made a sandwich. I put a sandwich. It just implies that you have two buns, two pieces.
I mean, I guess at the point you can have a hot sandwich.
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
I guess you could. I just feel like a burger is different, but you know what? That's fine. I said before that people are a moron. I take that back. That's a little too harsh. I respect your point of view on this.
Wow. Okay. Huh. I'm surprised.
I'm trying to be a little more conciliatory these days, Pete.
Yeah,
so
I can see it.
Part of that process.
I can see it and I can feel it, and I appreciate it.
Although you did make a rather, I thought, kind of crude comment about, what did you say about my pickle?
I said that you should not be allowed to tweet anymore.
I think you did say that. Did say that. And then I made some comment about you living in a shed and building mail bombs.
It got pretty ugly. It got pretty ugly.
But you and I are friends, even though
it got ugly because you insinuate, you go often to this Unabomber thing, and I feel like a lot of people don't know that you're tweeting to that I live in a shed, and it's like, could you give them some context? That's how I felt. Like, at least let them know I'm a shed person. I'm not just.
I don't think it's necessary for me to do that, and I think it actually kind of almost the joke is funnier if you don't know what I'm referring to.
I mean, you really blew me up.
Example,
I said Twitter should remove your account for your opinion about pickles not being on sandwiches, and you said I'm worse than a mass murderer, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't think I said that. But see, let me give you an analogy for this. You know, Ben Jacobs is on Twitter. He's a friend of mine on Twitter. He often will, when there's a Michael Cohen story about the guy who used to work for Trump, he will reference me in it, which is great, which is incredibly annoying. And so I make this joke that he looks like the General Zod character in Superman 2. And if you remember Superman 2, as of course I do, General Zod and his two evil henchmen killed 3 astronauts on the moon at the beginning of that movie.
That's right.
So what I will often point out is that he'll make a comment, I'll say, you killed 3 astronauts on the moon and you're still walking free today. And not everyone gets the joke, but it's just such a random thing to say.
He's a fairly well-known reporter.
He's a very well-known reporter. I don't ever
that is the kind of I just look. I know
like a 40-year-old movie, so I never gets that reference.
Yeah, I'm not even sure they're making a connection. That's what he looks like. It's I see your game, and I'll meet you there, Michael. I got it.
So people are like, why did Ben Jacobs kill people on the moon?
No, I love it.
Was he an astronaut?
I try to have that kind of play, extreme kind of stuff on Twitter as much as possible. I think it's so fun. And I know you're always good for it. So, yeah.
And look, we've been through a lot together, right? When you made all of those incredibly racist jokes to me a couple of years ago, I kind of I let it go. I said, we're friends. I understand that you have your foibles. I'm going to let those things go. Yeah. So, we can move past that and we can still be friends, which I think is really important.
Yeah. And when, listen,
Come on, do it.
I don't want to do this to you.
No, do it.
I don't want to. No, I don't want to get too personal, but you.
No, please feel free. It's okay. It's okay.
You shouldn't be allowed to walk the earth. And I just.
No, that goes too far. No, that goes too far.
You think so? Well, I think you and I both know why, and I'll leave it at that, folks. I think that's the worst. I think that's the best I can do.
That's actually pretty good.
That's the best I can do. Leave them wondering what this horrific thing you did.
But I brought a scalpel to this fight, and you brought a sledgehammer. That's all I'm going to say right now, because you just went. That's true. You went from he made racist joke to literally I'm the worst person.
You're right.
On the face
no,
of
you're
earth.
right. I didn't play fairly. You're right. You win on my show, but I'll edit it. In the end, I win.
In the end, you win.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
But let me just say before I go, though, to all of Pete's listeners, he is, he's a mensch. I'm kidding, of course, about
all the private racism and sexism and anti disabled people.
Yes, all of that.
Yes,
all of that.
Most of it.
But I mean, there's most of it. I am joking, of course. He is a prince among men. I have nothing but good things to say about him.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you and love you, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, man.
All right, there he goes. Michael Cohen, everybody. How'd you like that? Thank you very much for listening. Almost 2 hours today. How about it? Michael Cohen is on Twitter at SpeechBoy71. You should subscribe to his Substack, Truth and Consequences, truthandcons.substack.com. Get his book, support his work. Let him know that you heard him here on the show. Let him know that you don't mind that he calls in on the phone. What'd you think? Was the phone quality annoying? Should I have him record locally, as we say? Colloquially? We say colloquially, locally? Meaning the person is recording like on a device in their apartment or home or whatever. And then they send you that recording. And then you just match them up. That's what I mean by locally. If you're still listening to me, you're a real champion. And I have nothing but respect for you. And I honor you. I bend down on one knee and I say to you, thank you. Thank you for continuing to listen. But now you should move on with whatever you were doing in your day. And I thank you. I am so grateful and gratified to have you here still. An hour and 45 seconds, 45 minutes, so on. Okay, clearly I'm done. You guys are awesome. I love you. I'll talk to you tomorrow. John Carroll, please take me off this stage.
Start making sense and you stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.